Juan Soto is now a New York Yankee, and I thought it was a really good time for us to dig into how his bat will play at Yankee Stadium, a notoriously home run friendly park for left-handed hitters. He comes from a park that was not so friendly for home runs for left-handed hitters in San Diego. And we're going to do this using a pretty simple advanced scouting approach. I've made some other videos using TruMedia software to dig through where a hitter struggles and where maybe there is room to throw against him, and we'll stitch that back to why it matters about him going into Yankee Stadium. So here's kind of the rundown here of what we're going to walk through, and I'm going to jump right into it and just go with Juan Soto, take a pretty simple look. We're only going to look at him versus right-handed pitching because I just think it simplifies the whole thing. And I just want to look at a very, very basic slug heat map. Where do you create slug in the zone? And you can see for Juan Soto, it happens up and away from his body and also middle of the plate. Most hitters in baseball create some kind of slug over the middle of the plate. There's some stat where like 67% of the home runs hit last season in 2023 were on pitches over the heart of the plate. So every hitter is probably going to have some kind of red in the center of the zone. Soto is interesting in the respect that he has this ability to kind of cover up away really well. And when you actually look at the mechanics of his swing and how he swings, it starts to make a bit of sense. We can pop over to Baseball Savant and take a look at some four-seam fastballs he saw this season. Right, up away, like that kind of swing, this rotational, super rotational kind of swing. Everyone rotates when they swing, but I think in a guy like Juan Soto, the way to think about it is to watch like his follow-through. Watch, like, see if I can see frame by frame here. I don't know if I can now. But watch how he rotates and where the bat finishes, right? It's almost like under his shoulder line. Like, his rotation plane is very parallel to the ground, whereas some guys, like a Freddie Freeman, are much more, say, angular to the ground. And I think this as a whole allows Soto to cover that pitch up away really well. That's a piece right there, really good. He's going oppo there, which we'll talk about in a second. Here's another pitch. And we'll see what this one is. But this is the characteristic of his swing that jumps out so much whenever I see him hit, is how parallel that swing is as he rotates around his body, especially on his follow-through. I think that allows him to cover this pitch kind of up away, and he loves extending his hands away from his body, as we're going to see. And that's a pretty simple way to look at it. And you could also see by looking a little bit deeper here. So we just saw a slug heat map, and then as we go into this advanced report, we see pitch frequency in this column. So where often are four-seam fastballs over here on the left thrown against Juan Soto from right-handed pitchers? Where does he swing? Where does he create damage? I'm going to use expected WOBA here. You could use whatever stat you want. A lot of them are going to overlap. You see that concentration up away that we were just talking about, and where does he miss? Those four columns are going to drive a lot of the discussion around Juan Soto in this video. And you could see that, but you could also see that as you push fastballs through the inner third of the plate, it doesn't do as good of a job at creating damage against them. And we could see that exact same idea here when looking at kind of flares against him, which are going to be over on this export of mine. Let me take a peek. Here we go. See, this is all the kind of flared, poorly hit balls against him. When you creep more, say, inside against Juan Soto, he doesn't have a tendency to create as much damage. This just might, again, be the preference he has. See, it kind of looks like he maybe got that ball, but he didn't because it's on the inside of his barrel, on the inner part of his barrel. So he paws right up at contact, kind of grab where that is. Yeah, it's barrel miss, but again, like he wants to get his body extended so much that he's able to cover this portion of the plate as we saw on our heat map. But when you trail back inside on the inner third of the plate, there is some susceptibility on four-seam fastballs. Now, the problem with it is that it's very easy for me to say that you could just push fastballs kind of up and in right here against him. It's a completely different thing to actually execute that offering. And one of the reasons I say that is because when you think about Jeremiah Estrada, right? Jeremiah Estrada, huge vert on his fastball. He cuts it a little bit, but he still has some arm side movement. If I were to predict where Jeremiah Estrada misses most often with four-seamers, it's going to be to his arm side. So it's going to be out over the plate. So if you think about it, if I'm Jeremiah Estrada, he's not doing it here. But if I want to put this pitch up and in, because I think, jumping back to our advanced report, that's kind of where he doesn't create damage. The problem is that my natural miss is going to take me over into where he hits the ball really hard, right? So you have to have really good command to get it on that upper end of that inner third of the plate. And the risk is that you're missing to your arm side. So a guy like Jeremiah Estrada here, this is a pull miss, so I think he's trying to go more so away based on the catcher target. You see the catcher drift up and in. And Soto kind of pops it up. But you see a lot of those pitches on the inner third of the plate, him pop them up, kind of flare him off, and not create the same solid contact he does in some of the barrels we saw up away. The thing that perplexes me slightly about Juan Soto in this respect is that versus cutters, you can see, again, frequency in, swings up in, and he creates a pretty good amount of damage all over the zone against cutters, especially on this inner third of the plate, which I'm kind of surprised about given the mechanics of his swing. The only thing I can think is that we're going to see that he doesn't do as well versus drop, so like sliders that are down and curveballs that are down. I think that's, again, because of how level his swing is. And maybe that allows him to cover things more on the inner third of the plate. The question I have, and that I can't really answer, but I'll leave it for you in the comments, is just why is he able to cover cutter in, but not fastball missed in? You know? Like, I'd expect that pitch, especially if he's so extended with his body over the plate, I'd expect the pitch that runs down the barrel, which is mainly a four seam, to be one that catches his barrel more often than the cutter. Yet, cutters in is where he kind of hits better, creates more damage than four seam in. So that's a kind of perplexity that I mentioned right here that I'm not entirely sure how to answer. He hits cutters really well for the most part when they're in, and I don't really see that same idea with four seam fastball. So perhaps it's the amount of drop it's allowing his barrel to get to the ball, but despite from that, it's a question I kind of have that I was still kicking around in my head even as I started recording this video. Jumping to sliders with Juan Soto, however, a little bit different of a story, right? Now, he hits sliders relatively well. If you look at his production against four-seam and slider, it's the two greatest among anything that he faces. The thing that I see, though, however, again, we're looking sliders, generally pitch down, in. I like that concentration inside. He swings generally down, in. Doesn't see a lot of them. And then you see, we're looking at the blue here, right, where he does not create damage. This isn't going to be a guy in Juan Soto you're going to be able to get swing and missing a ton. So I would more so look at where the blue is as opposed to trying to think of where the miss is, especially because you see there's like zero miss on four-seam, two-seam cutter, any kind of fastball over the plate. But you do start to open up the first bit of miss down in versus sliders. And you can see this again when you compare, right, X-Boba right here, this blue, right, weak contact, and then that overlaps with your miss. This is the prime area to put sliders. In applying the same concept that we applied with four-seam fastballs, right, you'd miss generally in the direction of the pitch's movement. So with four-seam fastball, you're going to miss up into your arm side. So if you're targeting here against Juan Soto, right, it's going to drift back into where he creates barrels. With sliders, however, you have a little bit of a different story. Because they're missing in the direction of movement, you generally are going to miss kind of down in. You're going to back foot him almost unintentionally, as though you're trying to almost get that in the zone. He does not create damage in that part of the zone, and he also misses in that part of the zone. So that's kind of the small window of opportunity, I think, that pitchers generally have, especially if they have more depthy sliders than sweeper sliders. That's kind of where I think you're going to get the most ability to have upside in creating some kind of swing and miss versus a guy who really does not chase a lot, well below average chase rate. And let's look at Alexis Diaz here. Again, depthy sliders is not a sweeper. It's up at 89, right? Really good pitch. And again, the quality of the pitch here probably has some point, but he tends to swing over these pitches down in, and I think this gets back to the point of things that are more depthy down in for him because of how level his swing is. Doesn't really allow him to extend. He doesn't really like this pitch. You see a lot of the concentration that he'll see on swing and miss side versus these particular kinds of sliders. And it varies in the kind of pitcher he's facing that creates this, right? Nick Meir is not nearly as good of a pitcher. Depthy slider, that's a fooled. Might just be purely fooled there, trying to think fastball. This might be a little cheaper, but you can look at like a Ryan Helsley swing, same idea, tie game. Helsley pulls this pitch in. I think Soto's looking fastball there again. He is a fastball hitter, so I could kind of understand that. Helsley throws 100. He knows he has to time himself up for that. Logan Gilbert, here's another one. Let's see if we can take a peek at this one. Same idea. All these pitches kind of down in that he's not able to get down to. He's not able to cover. That one I like a little better because I don't think he's thinking fastball there. He feels like he's more 3-2. Probably thinks he's going to get a slider from Gilbert and still really isn't able to connect on it. It's a really good quality pitch again. Like controlling for that, I'm not particularly surprised that he doesn't do well versus it, but I do think if you have any kind of hard, kind of more gyro-y, depthy slider, perhaps there's a window of opportunity down and in versus Juan Soto, right? The same thing comes up versus curveballs, but the contact is what we're looking at here as opposed to swing and miss. And this gets back to the point of him versus depthy pitches not being as good, right? And I get, right, I'm pointing out the flaws of Juan Soto and making it seem like it's an easy way to approach him. It's not easy, but I do think there's maybe a couple paths to take, right? This is one of them. Freddie Peralta, more curve here, 78. His regular slider's like 85-ish. Down in the zone. Good, same idea, right? Just does not create a lot of contact or damaging contact in that part of the zone. You could see this by looking at our plot, right? Curveballs are generally thrown down. He's swinging when they're in the zone, and yet the damage he creates is a lot of blue. There isn't a higher concentration of red like we see up here with sliders that are middle of the plate, or even like fastballs and two-seam. See that fastball up and away, really deep red concentration. On curveballs, we get a couple specs here. All look like they're pitches that are probably missing a little up relative to where the pitcher wanted it. And we're not really looking for swing miss here because you're not going to get him to swing miss. What we're looking for instead is some kind of weak contact. So Take a look at another one here. Miguel's a higher slot guy. Super tall dude. Throwing a knuckle curve, 87. That's a curveball at 87. Jesus. Yeah, that's a really, really good pitch. We could see maybe there's a more generic one here that isn't as good. Let's see like Miles Michaelis. This is a good one. I think he throws a little slower. Yeah, 75. 1-1 count. Really loopy pitch. Really good location there. And Soto just doesn't do the best job against these more depthy pitches. So that opens up the question, right? I'm going to mention it right here. I have it right here. San Diego's a park factor for left-handed hitters, home runs specifically of 84, right? 16%. You're expecting 16% less home runs relative to the average hitter in San Diego at Petco. When you go to Yankee Stadium, you're expecting 23% more. That's a swing of like almost 40 percentage points. That's a massive, massive swing. But it's curious because I think generally the approach against Juan Soto, or let me jump back here and show quick. So we see the park factors here, right? Again, it's not surprising. Yankee Stadium, you hit a bunch of home runs there for left-handed hitters. The thing I want to point out about Juan Soto is you'll see here, we're looking at fly balls and line drives versus right-handed pitchers. Pull, center, straightaway, and oppo, right? What do you do relative to league average? He does not pull as much of his line drives and fly balls as the average major league hitter. He basically takes that percent and pushes it to oppo. And that goes out to our point of him really liking, I think, this up and away portion of the zone, especially against four-seam kinds of fastballs, right? It's harder to pull balls on the outer third of the plate. When you go back to the inner third of the plate, right? The average inner third of the plate for lefties, that ball's pulled about 50% of the time. So you run into this really interesting situation, I think, with Juan Soto, and the main takeaway I want you to have in this video is the angle to pitch him is inside four-seam, right? And we also think it's inside on slider, non-sweeper sliders, kind of more depthy sliders, this portion of the zone. But that is the portion of the zone that he's going to pull the ball more. I get that maybe the mechanics of his swing don't really allow him to do that at present, but I'm curious if he goes to Yankee Stadium, if there's some kind of conscious adjustment for him to play around with covering pitches on the inner third of the plate better and allow him to pull the ball more. And I say that because I don't really think you need high quality of contact on the inner third of the plate to pull balls out of Yankee Stadium to right field. And I hope that makes some sense in how I walk through this. I'm going to keep this video kind of tight, right? We walk through a couple pitches here. We're not going to go through too much more. But that's the main takeaway I want you to have, is just consider him going into Yankee Stadium, thinking about pulling balls more. The biomechanics of his swing may not allow him to do that, given how much he slugs on the outer third of the plate. But it's an interesting question, and one I imagine if I'm the Yankees, I'm sitting down with him and maybe considering. I'd also be really fascinated. I'm not really a hitting guy. You see a lot of my videos on this channel are more pitching based. I'd be curious if there's just no possibility of this happening based on how he moves, right? We go back to how interesting his swing is. I'll close it out with this, right? We see that super, super rotational swing on pitches kind of up, away, right? Really flat rotation, parallel to the ground, counteracts, very different than a guy like Freddie Freeman. His barrel almost finishes under his shoulder line, which is really different for some guys. Does that prevent him from covering that inner third of the plate? That's the question I would have for someone who has a better hitting mind. If you're watching this and you are a good hitting mind, shoot me a note in the comments. I'd be fascinated to hear your perspective. But Juan Soto, Yankee Stadium, it is a match made in heaven. It's just that he doesn't pull the ball a ton. So I'm wondering how much he takes advantage of the rifle field porch out there. Thanks for watching. As always, comments, subscribe, anything appreciated. Thanks for watching.